Fox News reporting that it appears Vice President Harris left Democrats with quite a bill for her unsuccessful campaign. The party is said to be on the hook for $20 million.
Welcome to the Bill Harris Show. I'm Bill Harris, and tonight we're diving deep into a developing financial crisis at the Democratic National Committee that's raising serious questions about the party's leadership, transparency, and ability to compete heading into the 2026 midterm elections. This isn't just about numbers on a balance sheet. This is about a party drowning in nearly $16 million of debt, while Republicans are sitting on close to $90 million in cash reserves. This is about broken promises, hidden reports, and finger-pointing that's tearing the Democratic Party apart from the inside. Tonight, we're going to walk through exactly how the DNC got here, what it means for the future of the party, and why some Democrats are saying their own leadership is making it impossible for them to rebuild and compete. Let's get into it. First, let's talk about the money, because the financial situation at the DNC is worse than most people realize. According to Federal Election Commission filings released in late December 2025, the Democratic National Committee reported just over $12.6 million in cash on hand as of the end of November. That sounds like a lot of money until you realize they're carrying $15.9 million in debt. That means the DNC is effectively underwater by about $3 million. But here's where it gets even more concerning. In November alone, the DNC raised only $10.7 million, while their spending outpaced their donations. They actually lost about $6 million from their campaign war chest during that single month. And this comes after they raised $23 million in October, more than double their November haul. Now let's put this in perspective. The Republican National Committee during that same period had $89.9 million in cash on hand and zero debt. Zero. The RNC dipped only about $1.5 million in cash during those same months, showing significantly better financial discipline. As reported by the New York Post on December 24, 2025, the DNC's November fundraising put them only a few $100,000 ahead of the Republican National Committee for that month's fundraising, but far behind the GOP's $89.9 million cash on hand and lack of outstanding debts as both parties look ahead to the 2026 midterms. An RNC spokesperson, Kirsten Pelz, didn't mince words when describing the situation. According to the same New York Post report, Pelz stated, "Ken Martin has turned the DNC into a money-losing operation that reflects the failures of the broader Democratic Party. The DNC is drowning in debt, still paying Kamala Harris's campaign bills, and watching donors flee as leadership bankrolls radical candidates voters don't want." The Republican messaging is clear. They see Democratic financial troubles as a symptom of deeper problems within the party. And whether you agree with that assessment or not, the numbers speak for themselves. So how did the DNC end up in this financial hole? A big part of the answer lies with the 2024 Kamala Harris presidential campaign. Let me give you some context. When Vice President Kamala Harris took over the Democratic ticket from President Joe Biden in July 2024, she had just 107 days to run a presidential campaign. In that time, her campaign raised an unprecedented amount of money in a very short period. Despite the massive fundraising operation, the reality of campaign expenses turned out to be more complicated than initially reported. Here's what actually happened. According to reports from Axios and the New York Post, the DNC made a private arrangement with the Harris campaign. The agreement was that the DNC would pick up the tab for any outstanding 2024 campaign bills, allowing Harris to claim she didn't end the race in debt. Through the first 7 months of 2025, the DNC paid more than $18 million toward Harris campaign expenses. According to the New York Post's December 24th report, Federal Election Commission filings show the DNC had to pay back more than $18 million in expenses associated with Harris's campaign in just those first 7 months of 2025. Now here's the controversial part. While the DNC was quietly funneling more than $20 million in donor contributions to pay off Harris's campaign debts, they were simultaneously sending fundraising emails to small-dollar donors claiming they needed urgent help to compete against Republicans. Many of those donors had no idea their money was going to pay off old campaign bills rather than funding new Democratic campaigns. The New York Post reported on August 26, 2025, that the DNC agreed to pick up the tab for more than $20 million of Kamala Harris campaign debt in a handshake deal. This was a private arrangement that wasn't initially disclosed to the broader Democratic donor base. By October 2025, the situation had evolved further. According to another New York Post report from October 22, 2025, the DNC paid off $1.6 million in debt for Kamala Harris's failed campaign as Democrats faced a tight race in New Jersey. This pattern of debt payments created a cascading financial problem for the DNC. Every dollar spent paying off Harris campaign bills was a dollar that couldn't be spent on current races, on building infrastructure for 2026, or on competing with the well-funded Republican National Committee. Now let's talk about the controversial loan that's at the heart of this debt crisis. In October 2025, as the DNC was struggling with cash flow and still paying off Harris campaign expenses, the party leadership made a critical decision. They took out a $15 million loan. According to the Wall Street Journal, which reported on this loan, the DNC took out the $15 million loan specifically to try to win races in the November 2025 elections. These were critical elections, including the New Jersey governor's race, Virginia state elections, and other key contests. The timing was significant. The DNC was facing tight races across multiple states, and they needed cash immediately to fund field operations, advertising, and get-out-the-vote efforts. But they were already strapped for cash because of the ongoing Harris campaign debt payments. A DNC official, speaking to the press, noted that the loan was taken out before their party secured key victories in New Jersey, Virginia, and New York City. These were successes that coincided with about $1 million in state-level spending per month. So the loan appeared to serve its immediate purpose. Democrats did win those November 2025 races, but the cost was adding nearly $16 million in debt to a party that was already struggling financially. Think about this. The DNC took out $15 million in loans to win a handful of state elections, while the RNC was sitting on nearly $90 million in cash, ready to spend on 2026 congressional races without going into debt. This is the kind of financial imbalance that can determine control of Congress. When one party can spend freely while the other has to borrow money for basic operations, that's a structural disadvantage that affects everything from candidate recruitment to message testing to voter outreach. But the financial crisis is only part of the story. There's also a growing controversy over transparency and accountability within the Democratic Party leadership. After Kamala Harris lost to Donald Trump in the November 2024 election, the DNC commissioned what's known in politics as an autopsy report. This is a standard practice after major election losses. You bring in experts, you analyze what went wrong, you figure out what messages didn't work, what demographics you lost, and you develop a strategy to win those voters back. The DNC's autopsy report was completed. It was ready. And then, in December 2025, DNC Chairman Ken Martin made a controversial decision. He decided not to release it. According to the New York Post's December 24th report, Martin suggested the report's findings would only be a distraction from its core mission. He decided to keep the analysis private rather than share it with the broader Democratic Party or the public. This decision sparked immediate backlash, even from within the Democratic Party itself. Senator Brian Schatz of Hawaii, who serves as Senate Chief Deputy Whip, publicly criticized this decision on social media. According to the New York Post, Schatz said, "I believe the DNC should release the report because 1. That's what they said they were going to do. 2. This is going to be a thing. 3. If there's good analysis, we should see it." That's a sitting Democratic senator essentially calling out his own party's leadership for lacking transparency. But the controversy goes deeper. According to the New York Times, which reported on this on July 19, 2025, the DNC's withheld report does not apparently address Biden's decision to run for re-election as the oldest president ever. That's a significant omission given that Biden's age and fitness were central concerns throughout the 2024 campaign. The Bulwark reported that some Biden and Harris consultants actually pressured party bosses to keep their names out of the report. Think about that. The very people who ran a losing campaign were able to influence what gets included in the autopsy of that loss. One DNC official who spoke on the condition of anonymity provided some details about what the report found. According to the New York Post, this official said the party failed on outreach, especially with voters between the ages of 18 and 30, who swung to Trump by 11 percentage points. The official also noted that Democrats didn't allay voters' concerns about crime and illegal immigration and lacked credibility when talking about the economy. These are important findings. These are lessons the Democratic Party needs to learn if they want to win in 2026 and 2028. But instead of having an open, honest conversation about these failures, the leadership decided to bury the report. Let's talk about some of the specific problems the Democratic Party faced in 2024, because understanding these issues is crucial to understanding why the party is struggling financially and politically right now. The age issue with President Biden was perhaps the most damaging. Biden ran for re-election as the oldest president in American history. He would have been 86 years old at the end of a second term. Throughout the campaign, there were visible signs that raised questions about his fitness for office. His debate performance in June 2024 was particularly damaging, and yet, according to multiple reports, the DNC's autopsy doesn't even address whether it was a mistake for Biden to run for re-election in the first place. That's a fundamental question that needs to be answered. Then there's the issue of how Kamala Harris became the nominee. When Biden finally dropped out in July 2024, just 107 days before the election, Harris ascended to the top of the ticket without any primary contest. Democratic voters never got to choose their nominee through a democratic process. The party establishment essentially anointed her. Now Harris has indicated she may seek the Democratic presidential nomination in 2028. According to the New York Post's December 24th report, Harris is considering another run at the White House. But is she the right candidate to lead the party forward? That's a question many Democrats are asking, especially given the financial burden her 2024 campaign has placed on the party. The New York Post also reported on December 24th that Hunter Biden recently criticized his father's presidency during a 5-hour podcast appearance, specifically mentioning what he called the obvious effing failure of the withdrawal from Afghanistan in August 2021 and a far too permissive immigration stance. On immigration specifically, Hunter Biden was quoted on the Sean Ryan show saying, "We don't want immigrants that are coming here illegally, draining us of resources, and being prioritized above people that are actual, literal heroes, that are still recovering from 20 years of endless war, or anybody else in our society." That's the president's own son criticizing his immigration policies. And the data backs up concerns about the scale of immigration during the Biden administration. According to the Congressional Budget Office, around 2.4 million immigrants came into the United States every year from 2021 to 2024. A Goldman Sachs analysis found at least 60% crossed the border illegally. These are the kinds of issues that cost Democrats votes in 2024, and they're issues the party needs to address honestly if they want to rebuild. Let's go back to the money for a moment, because the fundraising gap between the two parties isn't just about one bad month or one bad quarter. This is a sustained, long-term problem. According to the New York Post's reporting from July 21, 2025, top GOP campaign committees dominated Democrats in 2025 fundraising across the board. This wasn't just the RNC versus the DNC. Republican Senate and House campaign committees were also significantly outraising their Democratic counterparts. One DNC official tried to put a positive spin on this, noting that the DNC raised a total of $75.5 million in grassroots contributions between February and November 2025, which is nearly twice as much as was raised in those same months during 2017. But even that statistic is misleading because it's not adjusted for inflation. $1 in 2017 was worth more than $1 in 2025. And more importantly, it doesn't change the fundamental reality that Republicans are dramatically outraising Democrats when it comes to total fundraising and cash on hand. The grassroots fundraising numbers also raise another question. If small-dollar donors are giving to the DNC believing their money is going to elect Democrats, but it's actually going to pay off old campaign debts, is that an honest representation of how donor money is being used? This gets to a fundamental issue of trust between political parties and their donors. People give money because they believe in a cause and want to support future campaigns. When that money instead goes to paying off past debts without donors being clearly informed, it can damage trust and make future fundraising even harder. There's growing evidence that Democratic donors are pulling back, and it's not hard to understand why. If you're a major donor or even a small-dollar contributor, and you find out that the money you gave to support Democratic candidates in 2025 and 2026 is actually being used to pay off Kamala Harris's 2024 campaign bills, you might think twice about giving again. RNC spokeswoman Kirsten Pels specifically mentioned this in her statement, saying the DNC is watching donors flee as leadership bankrolls radical candidates voters don't want. Now, you can dismiss that as partisan rhetoric, but the fundraising numbers suggest there's some truth to it. The DNC's November 2025 fundraising of just $10.7 million was significantly lower than their October numbers, and their cash reserves continue to shrink while debt remains high. There's also the question of what happens when the party needs to ramp up fundraising for the 2026 midterms. If donors don't trust that their money will be used for current campaigns rather than paying off old debts, that's going to make it much harder to raise the funds needed to compete. The DNC official who spoke to the press tried to counter this narrative, saying the party will continue to aggressively invest in races nationwide. But aggressive investment requires aggressive fundraising, and right now the numbers aren't there. So what does all of this mean for the 2026 midterm elections? Democrats currently have a nearly 4 percentage point advantage over Republicans on the generic congressional ballot, according to Real Clear Politics polling aggregator. That's good news for Democrats. It suggests voters are leaning toward giving them another chance after their 2024 losses. But here's the problem. Polling advantages don't win elections. Money, organization, and turnout win elections. And right now, Democrats are at a massive disadvantage in terms of resources. The RNC has nearly $90 million in cash on hand with no debt. They can spend freely on competitive races, fund robust field operations, and invest in early advertising and voter outreach. They can recruit strong candidates by showing them the party has the resources to support competitive campaigns. The DNC, meanwhile, has about $12 million in cash and $16 million in debt. They're spending more than they're raising. They're still paying off 2024 bills, and they've had to take out loans just to compete in off-year elections. This isn't just about one election cycle. This is about building the infrastructure to be competitive for years to come. When you're underwater financially, you can't invest in long-term organizing. You can't build robust voter databases. You can't fund training programs for campaign staff. You're constantly in crisis mode, trying to find money just to keep the lights on. Beyond the money, there's a larger crisis of trust and transparency within the Democratic Party right now. The decision to withhold the autopsy report is emblematic of a broader problem. When a party loses a major election, the healthy response is to do a thorough, honest assessment of what went wrong, release those findings publicly, and have an open debate about how to move forward. That's what Republicans did after losing to Barack Obama in 2012. They released a comprehensive autopsy report that was publicly available. It led to significant debates within the party about immigration policy, outreach to minority voters, and messaging strategy. Democrats appear to be taking the opposite approach. Rather than transparency, they're choosing opacity. Rather than honest debate, they're choosing to bury uncomfortable findings. Senator Schatz's criticism is particularly significant because he's not some gadfly or backbencher. He's Senate Chief Deputy Whip, a leadership position. When someone in party leadership is publicly calling for more transparency, that tells you there's a real problem. And the pressure from Biden and Harris consultants to keep their names out of the report, as reported by The Bulwark, suggests that personal reputation and political positioning are being prioritized over the party's need for honest self-assessment. The 2028 presidential election is already casting a shadow over Democratic Party politics, and that's affecting current decision-making. Kamala Harris has indicated interest in running for president again in 2028. According to polling, she remains competitive against potential Republican challengers like Vice President J.D. Vance. One early survey of the 2028 general election showed Vance trailing Harris by just a single percentage point, according to Real Clear Politics. Other polling showed Vance defeating other potential Democratic challengers like California Governor Gavin Newsom. So Harris may genuinely be Democrats' strongest potential candidate for 2028, despite her 2024 loss. But here's the problem. If Harris is planning to run again, that creates conflicting incentives around the autopsy report. A truly honest assessment of what went wrong in 2024 might reflect poorly on her campaign and make her 2028 prospects more difficult. That could explain why there's resistance to releasing the full findings. This is where short-term political calculation conflicts with the long-term health of the party. What's best for Kamala Harris's 2028 presidential prospects may not be what's best for Democrats trying to win congressional seats in 2026. And this gets to a fundamental question. Is the DNC operating as a neutral party organization that serves all Democrats, or has it become a vehicle for protecting specific politicians and their future ambitions? There's also the uncomfortable question of Joe Biden's legacy and role in the current crisis. According to the New York Times reporting, the autopsy report apparently doesn't address whether it was a mistake for Biden to run for re-election as the oldest president ever. That's a glaring omission. Biden's decision to run again, despite concerns about his age, effectively foreclosed a competitive Democratic primary. It meant Democrats didn't have a chance to test multiple candidates and see who could build the strongest coalition and run the most effective campaign. When Biden finally dropped out in July 2024, it was too late for a normal primary process. Harris essentially inherited the nomination, and she had only 107 days to run a general election campaign. That's not enough time to build the kind of robust, tested campaign that typically emerges from a competitive primary. So in a very real sense, Biden's decision to run again, combined with his late exit from the race, set up the conditions for Harris's loss and the financial crisis that followed. But if the autopsy report doesn't address this, then Democrats aren't really learning from their mistakes. They're protecting Biden's reputation at the expense of honest analysis. And Biden's team isn't the only one being protected. The fact that Harris consultants were also able to pressure party leadership to keep their names out of the report suggests a pattern of accountability avoidance. So where do Democrats go from here? First, they need to address the immediate financial crisis. That means aggressive fundraising, but it also means being honest with donors about where their money is going. If the party is still paying off 2024 debts, donors deserve to know that. Second, they need to release the autopsy report. Senator Schatz is right. They said they were going to do it, and transparency is essential for rebuilding trust with voters and donors. Third, they need to have honest conversations about leadership. Ken Martin just became DNC chairman, but his decision to withhold the autopsy report and the ongoing financial struggles raise questions about whether he's the right person to lead the party through this challenging period. Fourth, Democrats need to think seriously about their 2028 presidential primary process. After 2024, when voters didn't get a real say in choosing the nominee, the party needs to commit to a robust, competitive primary in 2028 that allows multiple candidates to compete and lets voters make the choice. Fifth, they need to close the fundraising gap with Republicans. That's going to require rebuilding trust with major donors, expanding the small-dollar donor base, and demonstrating that the party can manage money responsibly. And finally, Democrats need to address the substantive policy issues that cost them votes in 2024. Immigration, crime, the economy. These are areas where voters clearly felt Democrats weren't speaking to their concerns. No amount of fundraising or organizational changes will matter if the party's message doesn't resonate with voters. The DNC debt crisis is about much more than money. It's about leadership, transparency, accountability, and the fundamental question of whether the Democratic Party can learn from its mistakes and rebuild. Right now, the party is nearly $16 million in debt, while Republicans have almost $90 million in the bank. Democrats are still paying off Kamala Harris's 2024 campaign bills. They've withheld an autopsy report that could provide crucial lessons, and they're heading into the 2026 midterms at a massive financial disadvantage. These aren't insurmountable problems, but they require honest acknowledgement and serious action. The decisions Democratic leaders make over the next few months will determine whether the party can recover and compete effectively, or whether they'll continue to struggle under the weight of debt, dysfunction, and donor distrust. The stakes are high. Control of Congress hangs in the balance in 2026. The 2028 presidential election is on the horizon, and right now, Democrats are starting from a position of significant weakness. Whether they can turn this around remains to be seen. But one thing is clear. Without transparency, accountability, and better financial management, the road ahead is going to be very difficult. That's our report for tonight. Thanks for watching The Bill Harris Show. I'm Bill Harris.